Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the In a Nutshell podcast here on the Sports Daily Media Network YouTube channel. I'm your host, Sean Vowells, and I'm joined by Joe Meade. This is episode 80, filmed on January 15th, 2024. Joe, we're just going to do a little bit of a Big Ten basketball catch-up here. The YouTube listeners can see that the Big Ten standings are up there. Now, there was one game that went final since then. It doesn't really change. Michigan State did beat Penn State, so Michigan State is now 16-0, 15-2, and Penn State is 2-5. They'll just bump down one spot. The Nittany Lions, Spartans will still stay at the top. But Joe, we're going to go back to last weekend, really Friday night, and it was the UCLA Bruins who, at the time, lost their third game in a row to Maryland, 79-61. They then followed that up with another loss to Dylan Harper and Rutgers. Joe, since this team beat Gonzaga on December 28th, they've taken 4 losses in a row. There's been some chippy post-game press conferences from Mick Cronin, as we can expect. Nothing new, really, from him there. But, Joe, is there one thing that you can put a finger on here as why UCLA is sort of turned over really quickly?
Yeah, Sean, I'm going to be real honest. Outside of Tyler Bilodeau and even him against Rutgers was short of disgraceful. 0 of 7 from the field. They're not getting consistent scoring at all. And that's something that's, pretty troubling for them. One of the last few videos we did, definitely not the last one, but prior to the Michigan UCLA game, which was, funnily enough, we recorded our last basketball segment before that game went final. We said how UCLA was great. They had guys off the bench, whether it was Dylan Andrews, Sebastian Mack, that could contribute. Tyler Bilodeau, Eric Daly, Sky Clark, Stefanovic, all those guys were efficient. Ever since then, you're not getting a consistent performance from anyone. While Eric Daly played well against Rutgers, Tyler Bilodeau did nothing, and he was really good against Michigan and Maryland. Probably the reasons they were even in those games for a while. But even then, if you listen to his coach, he's still not doing his job because Vlad Golden scored 36 on him. And, Maryland had very little problems down low as well. And, say what you want about the officiating. You don't drop 3 straight games if there's not a huge issue. And I don't think it's egregious of me to say UCLA had, at worst, a talent equivalence or a surplus of talent compared to the 3 teams they've lost to. And for a team that we talked about being Big Ten title contenders, they're now a team. I don't want to say they're in complete danger of missing the tournament quite yet, but they're in danger of finding themselves in that bubble conversation very quickly if they don't turn it around.
And Joe, I think the first game at Nebraska's a good team. I think you can excuse that, but getting trounced at home by Michigan and then not competing at Maryland and then losing to Rutgers, any one of these results could probably be written off as a one-off. Okay, this team played pretty well. Michigan is, a really good team. Maryland is a pretty solid team. But all 4 of them together, I think there is a connectiveness problem here with UCLA. It doesn't seem like their effort isn't there. It doesn't seem like they're not getting open shots. It's just they can't string together a couple of good possessions in a row. And there's plenty of other teams that are dealing with that. At 11-6, I think you do have to look ahead a little bit for UCLA. I don't think they're really close to the bubble yet. They have so many quad 1 wins. I think I had them as a 7 seed in my last projection, which was before the loss to Rutgers. But there's a lot of bad things going on, which is, I guess, a good thing because there's a lot of things to fix. It's not like they're playing well and losing. They're not playing well. So, as we look ahead here, Joe, they do not have to leave the West Coast for nearly a month. Their next game off the West Coast is at Illinois on February 11th. That is a long way away. They have 2 games at home. They do they go up to Washington away. They play USC on the road and then a couple more home games. So, it seems like UCLA might have the perfect opportunity here to get this back on track.
Yeah, Sean. And with Mick Cronin, I doubt those practices are going to be pleasant, and I hope for those players' sakes they get it turned around because otherwise their inside outs might be turned around in a bad way because they're going to be running so much in practice if they're not already right now.
All right, Joe, we're going to go to their neighbors in Los Angeles, and that's the USC Trojans, a tough non-conference, but they turn the year with a tough home loss to Michigan, as we've talked about before. They do lose by 13 on the road at Indiana, but then they have turned that around with 2 straight wins on the road at Illinois and then at home to Iowa. Joe, as we see USC on the left side of the standings here, which is the top half, it seems like, at least for now, that they have taken themselves out of the bottom pack of this league as they try and, the goal there for a little bit was to probably make the Big Ten tournament, probably a little bit higher now.
Absolutely, Sean. I can't help but highlight Desmond Claude in these last 2 games, and even a little in the Michigan and Indiana games as well. I don't think we imagined him from Xavier being anything else but, if not their best player, their number 2, and right now he's their clear number 1. A big problem USC's had, Sean, in these games is just these droughts where they don't score at all. That's why Michigan was able to make runs on them twice in that game. And same too with Indiana, right? And, you credit Michigan and Indiana's defenses. Well, I don't want to credit Indiana too much because we're going to go after them in another video. But, against Illinois and Iowa, you have to score to beat those teams, especially Iowa. And to score 82 and 99, one in Champaign and the other against Iowa, who's notorious for scoring 90 points a game. It's really hard to not give this USC team credit and Eric Musselman credit. And one last thing before I turn it to you, Sean. I don't think the fact USC's competent, let alone good at times, is much of a surprise. This is kind of a theme we've seen with Eric Musselman, and I know a lot of people are going to use recency bias and use last year's Arkansas campaign against him, but he kind of puts these rosters together and he figures it out. There's a surplus of talent on this team. I don't think that's been their problem, whether it was St. Thomas, Desmond Claude, Wesley Yates, Ogbo, and Terrence Williams, still a depth piece, is still injured. So this is a team that can get better and probably will get better, which is scary for the teams that have to play them. If I'm a Wisconsin, Nebraska, UCLA, and Michigan State, their next 4 opponents, I'm probably not thinking that game's the easiest anymore. And fun fact, now that USC's won a lot of games, they're now a quad 1 home game, meaning if you play USC on the road, that will be a quad 1 game from now on. So good for the conference, good for USC, and good for Eric Musselman.
And the Musselman thing tracks, Joe. Obviously, the Big Ten listeners might not know that, but even back to his Nevada days, really, his teams were on an upward trajectory pretty much the entire year. I think you could throw last year out at Arkansas, but it just kind of depends when he figures it out. If it's in January, like it seems to be right now, the team is usually pretty good at the end of the year. If it's like middle of February, that's when you get that 9-10 seed team that could make the Sweet 16. But I don't know if USC is good enough to make the tournament. I still think there is a little bit of a talent gap there, but it's pretty clear that they are not going to be one of the bottom 3 teams in this league as it maybe looked like a couple weeks ago. Claude is the difference maker for me. He is probably the best scoring wing in the league, I think. Maybe you can
He's at least top 3.
Maybe you can make the argument that some other wings who really control the ball and run the offense aren't wings. But if Claude had figured out that he could drive a couple minutes earlier against Indiana, they could have won that game. And then obviously they tear apart Illinois, interior defense, which has been suspect at times, and then they nearly drop 100 on Iowa, another defense that has been suspect at times. So I think if you're not going to guard the rim, Claude is going to get a lot of points. And Wisconsin on Saturday for them at home will be really interesting. I think they're starting to see themselves, maybe praised on podcasts in the media. Does Wisconsin, who's playing pretty well, and we're going to talk about them next here. Actually, no, we're going to talk about them later. But if they can win this one, Joe, then they go to 4-3 in the league, 12-6. I think the tournament becomes a real possibility. Now, if they lose
and that'd be their second quad 1 win in the last week, so that'd be huge.
And that Illinois win is going to age great because that was truly a blip in the road for the Fighting Illini. But, Joe, if they beat Wisconsin here, you look at your upcoming games and this tough stretch that they have to go through where they definitely do not have to win all of them. They still have to play Minnesota. They still have to play Northwestern. They still have to play Rutgers. They still have to play Washington. like there is a way that this team could sneak into the tournament. I'm still leaning no for now. I just think that as more Big Ten teams play them, they might get figured out a little bit because they really don't have a five. And St. Thomas is not a player who should be taking as many shots as he has, but pleasantly surprised with USC so far, at least in the last week. All right, Joe. Well, that team that they did beat, Illinois, sandwiched that loss to USC with a 91-52 victory over Penn State and a 94-69 victory at Assembly Hall. Joe, it's pretty clear that that was not how Illinois is going to proceed, and at the end of the day, they go 2-1 in that 3-game stretch with 2 huge wins, and still got to like their chances to finish at least in the top 4.
Sean, based on what I saw, excluding the USC game, which I know for a lot of people, especially some Illini fans who are particularly picky, they might not want to excuse it. But I want to make a point.
Did we lose you there, Joe?
Yeah, you lost
Yeah,
me for a
you're
second,
back.
but
You're
I want to
back.
make a point to Illinois fans that the USC loss, we're
You
just gonna
there?
call him K. Yeah, we're just gonna call him KJ at this point because that's what Brad Underwood's been doing. It's a lot easier than pronouncing. No offense to the young man, but he's been playing phenomenal. And had he played the USC game, we credited USC a lot. This isn't even a discredit; it's more of a how great a roster Illinois has. If he played against USC, USC's probably not going into Champaign and winning. And I'll tell you this much: I think, having him in that lineup, they look like the best team in the Big Ten. The eye test is there. You might be able to say Michigan, maybe even Michigan State to a degree, but when he's in there, they're scoring 90 plus points, and their offense is as efficient as it is. As long as they play solid enough defense, I don't see many teams in the country that can beat them. So, I think Illinois is a very scary team. I think this game on Sunday at East Lansing is probably early conference game of the year in terms of ramifications. Also, in terms of matchup, Underwood, Izzo. Just as a basketball fan, you'd have to love that game. And, how's Jaden Akins going to fare? Are these guys like Frankie Fiddler and Trey Holloman, some of the role players, Jason Richardson, are they going to be able to match up with the Will Rileys, the Visich, the Trey Whites, the Connor Boswells? I'm really fascinated by that game. And the Illinois has just been nothing short of fantastic in their wins, and that's the real scary thing, Sean. I think this team is going to get better because they are very young, and I think by March this is going to be a nightmare matchup.
Yeah, this game on Sunday, Joe, if Michigan State is victorious, that would put them 3 games ahead of Illinois. That might be too big a mountain to climb to get Illinois back to being the Big Ten regular season champions. But I still do think that Illinois is probably the conference's best bet to go far in the tournament and potentially go to the Final Four and end the conference's title drought. But that USC game, I don't think is really going to matter all that much because KJ was out, like you said, and they sandwiched that with 2 really big wins. And I know Illinois fans probably aren't going to write it off, but I'm pretty close to totally disregarding it, if we're being honest. Especially if they go into East Lansing, nobody even remembers who Desmond Claude is in Champaign. But I've been impressed. Obviously, they looked really good last night against Indiana. We're going to hold all of our Indiana opinions for a special video that's coming because there are a lot of them. All right, Joe, we have got the 2 Michigan schools. Your Michigan Wolverines and Tom Izzo's Spartans up at the top of the league. Michigan State 6-0 now after tonight's win that just went final. Michigan 5-0. Joe, along with the team in West Lafayette, it seems like there is a little bit of a top of the pack forming here with Illinois, with Purdue, and the Michigan schools. But obviously that is the threshold for the double bye. But are you seeing a little bit of a separation in between 4 and in the middle of the pack?
I think another team you could also include, because I know some of our viewers might get mad, potentially in Oregon and a mega perhaps, and I say a mega perhaps for Wisconsin. I would have said so after they were up 17 at the half, but how they looked against Ohio State, we'll get into that later. But I think just to throw those teams in there. Um, Yeah, Sean. I think Michigan State and Michigan, if I were to use one word, it would be efficient. And in terms of eye test, I know I'm the Michigan resident Michigan scumbag on this podcast. I do think Michigan State looks better in the eye test. They don't turn the ball over, and Michigan State is the second. This is something I want people to pay attention to. They're the second best free throw shooting team in America. That's going to matter at the end of games, and that's going to matter in these close games because Michigan State hasn't had a whole lot of them quite yet. Maybe the Ohio State game people are going to call close. In terms of nail biter games, Michigan State's going to be on the better end of a lot of those because they shoot their free throws and they have guys that can contribute. Frankie Fiddler went off for 18 tonight against Penn State. Um, you have Jaden Akins, who's their probably most consistent scorer. And then you have the exciting freshman Jace Richardson and the guys off the bench, Cohen Carr, Trey Holloman. I mean, it's kind of the same theme we've talked about the whole year for State, Sean. I don't think they've really been challenged ever since the maybe a slight challenge in the game at Value City Arena in Columbus or Schottenstein Center. But I think, we're going to learn a whole lot about Michigan State, Illinois in terms of January on Sunday. I still think no matter what happens, barring a team losing by 30 or winning by 40 or whatnot, I'm going to still think those are two of the top four teams in the conference. But if Michigan State wins that game handily or Illinois wins that game handily, I think we're going to have a new power ranking. And I'll tell you what, whoever wins that game, and if it's handily, they're probably going to be our number one.
I think Michigan State at this point, Joe, is probably the best bet to win the league over the 20 games. It just seems like they do a lot of the little things right. And there might be a game where the other team gets hot and wins, and that might not be great for their NCAA tournament hopes. But I think over the course of the season, they're going to have the best record. I think Illinois and Michigan probably I would pick to beat them on a neutral right now, but in terms of taking care of business against everybody, clearly Illinois has had a hiccup so far, and I think Michigan might be susceptible to one more so than Michigan State, but the Spartans look like that if you roll out 10 games, they'll go 8-2, no problem. And obviously, they haven't lost in the league yet; they're 6-0. But I think over the course of the season, Michigan State will probably end up with the best record, even though they're probably the third best team in the Big Ten, as many of the computer and analytics show.
Yeah, Sean. And one quick thing as we go to Michigan, as they are my team, but I was sending this article and this observation. I call it the rule of nine. Michigan consistently turns the ball over 12 times a game. If they could make 9 threes and have less than 9 turnovers, I think this team could beat any team in the country. Now, the if I didn't put enough emphasis on because this is a team that has not protected the ball well at all, including the UCLA win. I mean, Danny Wolf was responsible by himself for 10 turnovers. And that's going to happen when you run the offense through him, when you run Area 51 with him and Vlad Golden, who, by the way, my first team all Big Ten selection for Vlad Golden's looking mighty fine right now, especially after that 36 piece he put on UCLA last Tuesday. So I think offensively the ceiling's a lot higher for Michigan than even a Michigan State. I think, you can match that with Illinois. But, Damari Burnett, a guy last year who caught a lot of flack, he's making threes. He's one of the most efficient shooters in the country. Vlad Golden looks like one of the best big men in the country. And then you pair that with Danny Wolf, who's probably the biggest unicorn in all of college basketball, and Trey Donaldson, a scoring point guard. The only real criticism of this team is perhaps a Roddy Gale or some guys off the bench for Michigan. And even those guys, Roddy Gale's averaging 12, 13 a game. So this is a team that's hitting its stride. I think it was good they lost those 2 games because now they're really comfortable in late game situations, and they have to be because I was texting Sean last week. They blow 18-point leads faster than any team in the country, and then they get the 18-point lead back. So, watching a Michigan game this year is kind of watching like 3 games in one. So, definitely an exciting team. I don't think the way they're playing now is going to cater them to win this 20-game conference. I still agree with Sean. I think Michigan State's my favorite as of now, but like I said, I defer to that Sunday game. That game might show us a lot.
And Joe, I've thrown up the KenPom ratings here on YouTube for now. You'll see Illinois is the top team in the league right now at 8. Obviously, 2 huge quad 1 road wins helped the margins there. Michigan is second at 11th, Purdue third in 12th, and then Michigan State in 15th there, the 4th team in the league. And then after that, there is a little bit of a gap until Wisconsin at 21, Maryland at 24, Oregon at 25. So obviously, a lot of those are good numbers for the Big Ten. That is another point that I wanted to get to here, Joe. I did do a bracketology Monday, and the takeaway for me is that the Big Ten is in great shape for not only getting a lot of teams in, but also getting pretty good seeds. The computers are really, really liking the Big Ten right now, and you'd have to think with how many good teams are in the SEC, them beating up on each other might help them a little bit too, but this league is going to get double-digit teams in the tournament most likely. Clearly, the 4 teams that I mentioned up there in the top 15 in Ken Palm are probably all at protected seeds right now. Oregon, Wisconsin, not far behind. Oregon already has 7 quad 1 wins, which is ridiculous considering they played 17 games, and there are teams in the field with 1 quad 1 win. The bubble is weak. I had Ohio State as my first team out, but their numbers obviously got a lot better with their 2-point loss at Wisconsin yesterday, Joe, which we'll talk about now. But unless you have any other thoughts on the bracketology, let's get into that game at the Kohl Center.
Yeah, Sean, one last thing before we do. There are 10 teams Sean has in right now, and 11 if you want to say Ohio State gets in. Now, one of those teams we're going to eviscerate, and that would be Indiana. But
yeah, they're not in if I do it tomorrow.
Yeah, but that doesn't account for, USC's creeping up, or if perhaps if a Northwestern finds their stride, though lately I'm not too sure. But, Sean, an exciting time for the league. And one thing I'll also say, there's going to be a lot of quad 1 opportunities in this conference with this many teams and the net ranking so high. So ample opportunity. The Big Ten is the true land of opportunity in college basketball. But let's get to the Badgers.
Yeah, so Joe, I did throw up the bracketology there for a second. Michigan, or let's go through them. We've got Michigan State as a 3, Michigan, Illinois as 4, Purdue, Oregon at the 5, UCLA, Wisconsin at 7, and then you got Nebraska and Maryland at 9, Indiana at 10, and then Ohio State first team out. Now, obviously, I did this 3 or 4 days ago at this point. Indiana's lost big since then. UCLA has lost since then. So clearly, this is just the most recent projection. But a lot of good things. You have to think Illinois is probably higher than 4 as of now, and I think we're looking pretty good to get 4 protected seeds, which is a lot more than we've had. We had 2 last year, 2 the year before, so hopefully that means it's good for the Big Ten. But, all right, Joe, well, let's get into that game at the Kohl Center yesterday. It was a game that you thought Wisconsin had control of for the entire of it, but Ohio State nearly puts together a pretty decent comeback here late. They're down by 17 at halftime. They come all the way back to I'm not sure if they ever tie it, but they get it awfully close. Wisconsin, though, keeps it rolling with a W, and Ohio State comes really, really close to pulling off what would have been an incredible comeback.
Yeah, I want to give a lot of credit to Jake Diebler. I think it was pretty easy for them, especially how some of December went, particularly the Maryland game. The Auburn game was, not acceptable, even though that's the number 1 or 2 team in the country on any given week. To lose by almost 40 is not capable. It's not something a pretty proud program like Ohio State does very often. But to do that, beat Kentucky, have another emotional low, losing at home to Michigan State, and really they should have lost to Minnesota. Minnesota doesn't foul in the first overtime. We might be having a totally different conversation about Ohio State and Jake Diebler. This is kind of the theme of Ohio State season, roller coaster, right? You do have a big hit. You start off the season great. You beat a pretty solid Texas team. You lose to an A&M. You get blown out by Maryland. You get blown out by Auburn. You blow out Kentucky. Lose at home to State, and then beat Minnesota. And the last 2 games are good for the numbers, really not good for the psyche of this team. I think they outplayed Oregon and Jackson Shellstad, which he did both at Ohio State and Penn State. Definitely a player, if your team hasn't played yet, you're going to not like because he's going to score a lot in close clutch moments. So In terms of Ohio State, I think Diebler's done a really good job in-game coaching. You look at the stat line for Wisconsin. John Tachi, you see the 17, you think that's good. He only had 7 field goal attempts. Now, they did get him to the line a lot. He was 10 for 10. He made them pay. And Wisconsin as a team made them pay. 25 and 28 from the line. I do think the second half, Ohio State kind of was loose. They got Thornton and Royal shots. John Mobley Jr., not necessarily the greatest game from him, but he's a guy that does not play like a freshman, Sean. He plays like a junior. He hits free throws like a junior. This is a team that's going to get quite a lot of teams. I do think they're right outside the bubble, as you said. They're going to be a team I'd probably bet to end up on the right side of it if they could hunker down on defense a little more. Because when this team hits shots, I think they can beat anyone in this league. From the bottom being Minnesota to the top being Illinois, Michigan State. So I think there's a lot to like. I don't think the results are what we like so far. But getting into Wisconsin, they're winners of 6 straight now, Sean. I don't think what they've done in these games is particularly impressive. I think they've been better than the last 6 games, 6 opponents they've played. But I think it kind of affirms that they're for real. So I know I gave you a lot there, Sean. Comments on either of those teams?
Well, with Ohio State, you might be looking at the record at 10-7 and wondering if that will be enough. And early, something to look out for is that Ohio State's record might break the mold of 3 games over 500 to get in. Because, Joe, they don't really have an easy stretch coming up. They don't have many of the games at the bottom of the league left. They already played Minnesota. They do play Washington, Northwestern, Penn State. But I'm thinking like a really ugly 18-15 resume with 7 quad 1 wins might be enough for Ohio State. And I know the COVID year was a little different. I think 2 games over, a 2 games over Michigan team got in. Maybe it was 3.
3 games over, yeah.
So that is the mold right now. I think in the age of super conferences and with how deep both the SEC and the Big Ten look, Ohio State might be the team to break that. Because, Joe, if you watch them, they obviously have a big win against Kentucky. They've been able to win ugly. Obviously, Bradshaw was out for a while. He's now back. The roster's talented enough where I think they could scrounge up like an 8-12, 9-11 record with enough good wins to just make it in a year that if the bubble doesn't strengthen quickly, then they can find themselves in. I think it's just a really up and down team. It might be enough.
Yeah, Sean, and one key thing to account for, we talked about them winning close. They have no bad losses. They have no quad 2, 3, or 4 losses, meaning they're 2-7 in quad 1 games. Now, the 2-7 is not great, but the fact they're 0 in the loss category for the other quads is going to help them a lot. And I'll tell you this, Sean, 2 of those quad 1 wins that they have, they're away from home, and we know the committee likes that. And, as of right now, just counting these up, 5, 6, 7, they have 10 to 11 quad 1 games left. So
they're going to have 20 quad 1 games. 6-14 in quad 1 games might be enough.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I'm going to bet they don't go worse than 3-8 or 4-7 in those. I'm pretty confident saying that because of the scoring capability, especially if Devin Royal gets going. And I think John Mobley Jr. is really dangerous to go for 20 on any given night. And you add that with Bruce Thornton, who's about as sure thing of a scorer as you could get for that team. I think you'd watch out for the Buckeyes. And I don't think it's going to be an easy prep for any team going forward.
All right, Joe, well, we're coming up on a half an hour, so we're going to wrap it up here. Obviously, we apologize if we did not get to your team. There are too many damn teams in this league for us to get to them in a half an hour. But until next week, this is going to be our Big Ten update. Please check out our other videos on the channel, whether it's the football previews and recaps or some of our one-off basketball videos. Check out the bracket matrix. The link to the website is on there now. This because my first projection went in on Monday. So please check out all that, and we'll see you next time.